Colossal questions.
Who started April Fool's Day in the first place? Even though it sounds like a more modern holiday, April Fool's Day is actually much older than you might think. The truth is, historians can't say for sure where the April Fool's Day tradition first started, but they do have a few possible theories. There's an old Roman festival called Hilaria that might be the ancient predecessor to April Fool's Day. Hilaria festivities are mostly lost to history, but we do know that they included parades to honor the Roman goddess Cybele, as well as games and masquerades where people could disguise themselves as anyone they wanted, including nobility. It's even possible that during the festivities, which lasted days, no one could show any signs of sadness or sorrow. Now that's dedication to having a good time. Historians aren't sure whether the similarities between Hilaria and April Fool's Day are just a coincidence. While there are some striking similarities, the first recorded mentions of April Fool's Day don't appear until around 1,000 years later during the Middle Ages. But by the late 1600s, April Fool's Day was a popular holiday across Europe. In fact, likely the first viral April Fool's Day prank happened in 1698, when so many people were hoodwinked into heading to the Tower of London to watch the washing of the lions, a ceremony that didn't exist. The London newspaper the next day had to clear things up and debunked the prank for the masses and made sure to roundly mock anyone who fell for it. So, who invented April Fools? Who knows? Let's just be happy we have a dedicated day on the calendar just to mess with the ones we love. Now, get pranking. Who came up with leap years, and why do we have them? On Earth, one full solar year is about 365 days. One solar year is how many days it takes a planet to travel one full rotation around its sun. As you probably know, the calendar we use today was originally designed to match the solar year exactly, which is why our calendar is 365 days too. But there's a tiny problem with our nearly flawless calendar. It turns out the Earth takes just a little bit longer than 365 days to travel all the way around the sun. More accurate measurements show that it actually takes Earth exactly 365 days, 5 hours, 48 minutes, and 46 seconds to complete a solar year. That means each year has almost 6 extra hours that misalign the calendar year from the solar one. The ancient Egyptians were the first to find a solution for the problem, combining 4 quarter days into one full day every 4 years to reorient the calendar. Julius Caesar and the Romans took this Egyptian idea and included it in their new Julian calendar that spread across Europe and became the basis for our modern calendars today. The Romans were the ones who first decided that February 29th should be the extra day, known as a leap day. So that's how leap years work. But do we actually need them? Would such a small amount of time really throw things off all that much? Well, yeah. Just one extra day every 4 years doesn't sound like a big deal, but over the decades, those extra days start adding up, and before long, it would be snowing in the summer and sweltering in the winter. After 100 years, for instance, our calendar would be off by almost a full month from the solar year. That means every season would start a month later than it's supposed to. Fast forward 600 years, and suddenly the seasons would be completely flipped. So leap years might seem silly, but until we design a new, perfect calendar, this is still the best system we've got. Who first invented sign language? Just like any other language, no one person invented sign language by themselves. But many believe the process started with a Spanish monk from the 1500s named Pedro Ponce de Leon. No relation to the Fountain of Youth guy. He was inspired by a system of signs that he and other monks used to communicate with each other during periods of silent meditation, and decided to start a school for deaf children. While he didn't invent a formal sign language, Pedro Ponce de Leon reworked hand signals that they were using at his monastery, turning them into an alphabet he could teach. Pedro certainly wasn't the first person ever to use signals as a way to communicate. Many indigenous Americans use hand signals to help when trading with the Spanish and other Europeans, for example. But his system was the first known system made solely to help the deaf. Another Spanish priest by the name of Juan Pablo Bonet took Ponce de Leon's work and built upon it. He spent years developing methods for teaching this new alphabet of hand signals and wrote a book in 1620 where he laid out all of his teaching methods. His book was highly influential, and many of the signs that Bonet describes in his book are similar to the sign language alphabet we still use to this day. Over 100 years later, a French priest named Charles Michel de L'Epée took it one step further and founded the very first public school for deaf children, called the National Institute for Deaf Mutes. Children showed up from all across France to study at the new school, and many of them came with signs of their own that they had developed to help communicate at home. Epée collected all of these different signs and created a few of his own, publishing them as the first dictionary of sign language. He felt sign language needed to be as complex as any other language so that people could say just about anything without limitations. His work and school were so influential that before long, his standardized sign language spread all across Europe and eventually the United States as well. Today, people all around the planet use different regional variations of the same sign language that Epée developed and standardized using Bonet and Ponce de Leon's work. So, who invented sign language? No one person gets the credit. Instead, several people spent their life's work trying to help find a way for people with hearing disorders to communicate more easily. And that's pretty cool. Or another way to put it, thumbs up. What's the point of daylight savings? Credit for the idea of daylight savings time, or DST, is often given to a famous founding father, super inventor Benjamin Franklin. However, that's not quite right. While in France in 1784, Franklin, ever the jokester, wrote an anonymous essay suggesting people could save money on candles by waking up earlier and using the sunlight, but he never said anything about changing the clocks. That came over 100 years later, when an avid bug collector in New Zealand named George Hudson first proposed daylight savings time as we know it. You see, he had a job that left him with enough afternoon hours to get his bug collecting in, but having daylight in the afternoon was crucial. He wrote a paper suggesting we shift the clock by 2 hours for part of the year to help save his precious evening daylight. But it wasn't until the First World War that it really caught on. First, the German Empire and Austria-Hungary introduced daylight savings time in 1916. Then Britain, France, and the Allies did the same. Soon, the rest of Europe started using it, and a year later, Russia was on board. Last but not least, the US adopted daylight saving in 1918. Most countries in North America and Europe kept using DST after the end of the Second World War, and in the 1970s, it was officially adopted. There's 2 different versions of DST on Earth, one for the Northern Hemisphere and one for the Southern. Daylight saving time is much less important the closer you live to the equator. That's because daylight hours and nighttime hours stay basically the same all year round. That's why most places near the equator have never bothered with DST. Even though the US has daylight savings time, there are a few places near the equator that don't. Hawaii, most of Arizona, Puerto Rico, the US Virgin Islands, and American Samoa. So that's why we have DST. But does it really make a difference? That really depends on where you live. Why are there so many different languages on Earth? The most popular language on Earth isn't actually English or Spanish, it's Mandarin Chinese. And by a long shot, about 1.2 billion people speak Mandarin, and the next most popular language, Spanish, only has about 400 million speakers. There's well over 6,000 different languages spoken across the Earth. About 2,000 of them are spoken by less than 1,000 people today. So where did all these languages come from? To answer that, we need to go all the way back to when humans first started speaking. Experts aren't exactly sure when humans stopped using basic sounds to communicate and started speaking in different complex languages, but they do believe that human migration played a key role. As each separate group migrated in different directions, they would encounter completely different things. One group might move to a desert, another to the mountains, and a third to a forest. These groups slowly developed new languages to help them describe the new places they were living. And over time, two groups of people who started off speaking the same language could end up speaking two completely distinct dialects. Take English, Spanish, and French, for example. Have you ever noticed lots of similarities between those three languages? They're way more similar than, say, Russian or Japanese. But why? Well, it's because they're all rooted in the language the Romans spoke, Latin. After the Roman Empire collapsed, lots of different people who spoke Latin were suddenly isolated from each other because the Romans weren't there to connect them anymore. Over time, the areas we now call England, France, and Spain began morphing their shared root language of Latin into 3 different languages. That's why they share so many words, but still sound so unique. So why are there so many different languages out there? Well, because there's so many different people. And unless everyone wants to give in and start speaking Mandarin Chinese, I guess we'll have to make do with the languages we've got. Did early humans live side by side with the dinosaurs? According to experts, dinosaurs went extinct about 66 million years ago in what's called the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction event, or as we like to call it, the day that giant meteor crashed in Mexico and killed the dinosaurs. While no one knows for sure when the first humans evolved out of chimpanzees, experts put it somewhere between 60,000 and 125,000 years ago. Now that's a long time ago, but it's nothing compared to 1,000,000 years ago, let alone 66 million years ago. So prehistoric humans and dinosaurs never lived together, but I do have a little fun news. According to cutting-edge science, some species of flying dinosaur birds may have survived extinction, and their ancestors are still around today. Modern birds evolved from a group of dinosaurs called theropods, which were flesh-eating dinosaurs that walked around on 2 feet that looked kind of like modern-day bird feet. So birds are probably the only direct dino descendants living today, but there's a few other animals on Earth that aren't direct descendants but are related to dinosaurs. Turtles, crocodiles, lizards, snakes, and sharks. So humans and dinosaurs never lived together, but that doesn't mean that humans haven't lived alongside some seriously huge creatures. Mammoths, giant ground sloths, and kimono lizards, oversized apes, dire wolves, and saber-toothed cats are just a few of the fierce, giant creatures that early humans had to contend with. And now you know that humans and dinosaurs never lived at the same time. Where did the centaur myth actually come from? A centaur is an ancient mythical creature with the upper body of a human and the lower body of a horse that was first imagined by the people of ancient Greece. In most classic Greek legends, centaurs were wild, unstable creatures who didn't always like to follow the rules. Artists at the time would often include centaurs in their sculptures and pottery, usually showing them in battle with gods or partying hard. The iconic centaur has remained a common character in fantasy stories ever since, even to this day. So that's what a centaur is, but how did the myth actually start? What is the true origin of the centaur? Most experts today believe the centaur stories can actually be traced back to a real region near ancient Greece called Thessaly. The Greeks didn't know very much about the people of Thessaly, except that they were nomadic, horse-riding people. Nomads were any people who didn't settle down and build a settlement in one spot like the Greeks did. Instead, nomads chose to roam from place to place, setting up camp, then eventually moving on to the next place. The people of Thessaly relied on horses to hunt and travel. Over the years, these nomadic groups became some of the best horse riders in the known world. The theory is that Greeks mistook these nomadic people for mythical creatures since they appeared to move as one with the horse as if they were completely connected. Over time, the story took on a life of its own, and the myth of the centaur was cemented. Nowadays, centaurs in fantasy stories are often wise, stoic, and well-mannered, unlike their ancient counterparts, yet they remain just as popular a couple thousand years later.